Good morning. Giving folks a few minutes to trickle in here. Good morning, everyone. We're get started another minute or two here. Nice to see many of you for the second time this week. All right, so we'll give it one more minute and then we will go. We're just going to delay another moment. Some folks were having challenges with their Zoom link, so Emily's getting them updated link. So we'll hang tight for another minute here. Right, Emily, how we doing? We good, or we've got folks that are still trying to come through?
I think we can get started. I know we're waiting on Dr. Bazran, but hopefully
Okay, we can get started. She can join in. All right. Well, good morning. Jonathan Spector. Know many of you here in the conversation today. I've got my colleagues Colin and Emily here from the clearing, working to support the convening of our meeting here today. Just want to do a quick welcome before I turn it over. Welcome to today's learning session on overdose prevention sites. Unlike our monthly opioid strategy group meetings that many of you are actively involved in, where we are generating ideas and action planning, today is really more about listening and learning. We're really grateful for the participation of representatives from 3 cities who will be sharing today. And we really want to maximize our time and their time in learning as much as we can. So if necessary, I'm going to turn it over to Julie Wiegand in a moment to moderate today. I'll be the bad guy watching the clock as needed, but I'll make sure that we have an abundance of time for each of our presenters, as well as the opportunity for question and answer. And because of the size of the group, as you're familiar with, many of you with our summits, I encourage you, I know this group is not shy, I encourage you actively use the chat, put your questions in, ask your clarifying questions, comments, input. You'll see that you're on mute, and we want to manage the conversations and really maximize the time with our presenters. So please feel free to use the chat. Anything we don't get to today, we'll certainly follow up. This is not the only meeting we're having on this topic, but wanted to encourage you to go ahead and use that so we can get your input and hear your questions and comments. So with that, I will turn it to Julie Wiegand, who is going to be our moderator and set up our conversation today. Julie?
Hi, everyone. My name is Julie. I am the project director for the State Opioid Response Grant here in DC, and we are so excited that you're all here. Just a few things to keep in mind, mostly repeating Jonathan. We have time for questions at the end of each presentation, so you can put them in the chat, and I will facilitate a Q&A at the end of each speaker. Please don't hesitate to ask questions. As Jonathan said, we're here to learn, so I hope that we can all kind of approach this conversation with an open mind and curiosity. And finally, just a reminder that every jurisdiction is different, and DC's path to maybe someday operating an overdose prevention site is going to look different than what is presented today. And that's okay. And the goal for today is not to plan out that path, but to learn as much as we can from the places that have already done this work ahead of us. And we're very grateful that they're here. So with that, I will turn it over to our first presenters from Philadelphia. Rhonda Goldfein is the Executive Director of the AIDS Law Project of Pennsylvania, and Jose Benitez is the Executive Director of Prevention Point in Philadelphia. So I will turn it over to you both, and thank you again for being here.
Thank you. Jose, I think you're leading, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry, I had a little trouble getting myself off of mute. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having us. Look, like every municipality in the country, when fentanyl was introduced into the illicit drug market, we are having, and I'll apologize for the L. My office sits right outside the subway, basically, or the L. So we, like every municipality, we saw a increase in the number of overdose deaths associated with fentanyl when it came into the illicit drug scene at this particular point. Kensington, which is where I work out of, is one of the largest open air markets in the country, basically. Prior to fentanyl, we had the reputation of having some of the most pure heroin in the country. And so in the last 30 years, our local zip codes here that comprise Kensington, which there are 3, pretty much became a large open drug market. So a lot of dealing, a lot of drug sales going on, a lot of drug use going on, and then, you know, simultaneously we had the increase in the number of overdose deaths. In Philadelphia, we averaged in the last few years about 1,200, anywhere between 12 to 1,300 overdose deaths a year. All of those are avoidable. And as we began to, the harm reductionists in Philadelphia began to sort of look at this problem, we all decided that we needed to sort of figure out what other countries were doing. And of course, overdose prevention sites became part of our focus. We were already providing harm reduction services like syringe services programs, wound care, and free medical clinics. But we started to look at overdose prevention sites. In the beginning, when we started this conversation, we had conversations with our local council people. There's 2 of them in this district. And we actually reached out to the community groups to make sure that they were sort of involved in our thinking. And in fact, we had a benefactor who paid for a trip to Toronto to go up and look at overdose prevention sites, of which our 2 council people and folks from the community accompanied us to see how overdose prevention sites operate in Canada. So from the very beginning, there was certainly involvement in with the community, involving the politicos as well, and making sure that we had the support of our health department, which I think Rhonda and I could both agree we wouldn't be as far as we would without the support of our health department. Our health department really took the lead on this, and it was in the form of forming an overdose prevention task force that was run by the mayor, and basically making sure that the recommendations for overdose prevention came out of the work that overdose prevention task force did. And so, that's a bit a quick overview of some of the history that we have. I want to turn it over to Rhonda real quick, because I think Rhonda has a longer presentation, because then the legal stuff started to happen. So Rhonda could tell you the juicy stuff from here.
Thank you, Jose. So as Jose said, our mayor convened a task force to look at the recommendations, convened a task force of all the usual experts, all the smart people, to develop recommendations on how Philadelphia could address the overdose crisis. And the good news is that it wasn't a report that got put on a shelf that no one ever looked at again, but rather there was real consideration of the recommendations. And one of the recommendations was that the city would support and encourage, but not fund, a pilot supervised injection site. And that was encouraging. So Jose reached out to me because in addition to being dear friends, my organization, my day job, the AIDS Law Project, has provided on-site free legal services to the participants at Prevention Point for more than a decade. So Jose said, well, can you help us do this? And somewhat naively, I was like, sure, how hard can this be? We know this works. It's going to be great. We're going to save lives. Everyone will love this. And of course, we knew that the crack house statute, the section of the Controlled Substances Act, prohibits a drug-involved premises whose purpose is to manufacture, store, distribute, use a controlled substance. We knew that there was this statute. We knew that it was daunting. We knew it had a high penalty, unlike some of the penalties that Prevention Point had looked at before for operating a syringe exchange, right? The state paraphernalia laws have far less penalties than this federal felony. So the penalties for violating the Controlled Substances Act, that section, it's up to 20 years in jail and $250,000 fine. And I think it is forever burned in our memory when a lawyer who was part of our team jumped across the table at Jose and said, "Are you prepared to go to jail for 20 years?" I think your answer was not really. I'd rather not. Nonetheless, we thought this is a great idea. We looked at the models in other places and we decided that we could do this. Can you please show the model card? So that's slide 1. And we thought that this model, shows that we're going to offer a full range of services and that we will save people's lives. And that we were so convinced secure in the knowledge you're right, you can do anything. We started to tell everyone, hey, we're going to do this. We're going to open up this site. It's going to be really great. And then we started to hear threats. So Rod Rosenstein, who is then the Deputy Attorney General, wrote an op-ed in the New York Times that, quote, cities and counties should expect the Department of Justice to meet the opening of any injection site with swift and aggressive action. And so we were thinking, does he really mean that? Would he really do that to us? I mean, we just want to save lives. Would this really happen? Then our local U.S. attorney did an interview with the Philadelphia Inquirer, which is the paper of record in Philadelphia, in which he threatened us if we would move forward. And then he followed up with a letter with more threats that the DOJ will pursue appropriate legal remedies if we fail to comply with federal law. And so we were pondering this saying, but we just want to save lives. We can't possibly be breaking a law if we want to just save lives. And so as we were pondering how to move forward, the U.S. Attorney's Office sued us in February of 2019. And the lawsuit, thankfully, was a civil lawsuit, not a criminal lawsuit. So we weren't looking at those harsh criminal penalties. It was a civil lawsuit asking the court to determine that our proposed activities are unlawful. And while, the day that we heard that we got sued, we were like, oh, wow, we got sued by the federal government. No one wants to be sued. But after we had a day or two to process it, we thought, you know what, this is great. Because now we have a real forum for this conversation. This isn't us trading quotes in the newspaper or in public meetings. This is a real forum. I'm a lawyer. I believe like you have an orderly process, it all works out. So we responded to that lawsuit with a counterclaim saying, oh no, court, we want you to find that our actions are legal. We want a judgment that says our actions are legal. We also added some other claims, a religious freedom claim and a commerce clause claim. More on that in a bit. In October of 2019, the court ruled that our ultimate goal is to reduce drug use and not facilitate it, and that our intended conduct would not prohibit the crack house statute. And then in February 2020, that decision was reduced to a final declaratory judgment. A lot of lawyerly weedy things, but that's what happened. And we prepared to open. And I'm sure that you all know the experiences of loud neighbors. So we had some loud neighborly opposition. And we were sorting it out. It's like, look, we have a green light. This is the first green light in American jurisprudence to have this project. We're going to take this green light. And then COVID stopped. There's that expression about when you plan and then God really plans, or I think it's people plan, God laughs. So it kind of felt a little bit of that. So we were stopped, as everyone else was, and thinking about how do we open this site? How do we save lives? How do we do it safely in the time of COVID? At the same time, the U.S. attorney filed a stay, and a stay is what it sounds like, stay, you can't move forward, and an appeal to the Third Circuit. The federal system is first the district court, then the circuit court, then the Supreme Court. In June, the judge ruled in favor of the stay. We couldn't move forward. Notably, though, he doubled down on the legal analysis that our activities were lawful and added for the first time public health research that showed that these sites work. Previously, he was set on the question of, is it legal, is it not? Whether it worked was kind of incidental to the question. We were thinking about like, can we open up a fruit stand? Yes, no. Whether we sell a lot of fruit was incidental. But now for the first time, the judge put into the public record, into the legal record that, that the sites work. So that was encouraging, although we weren't permitted to go forward. He said that he thought that that Philadelphians had frayed nerves from COVID and from the protests after the murder of George Floyd. We tend to think that Philadelphians are a little bit tougher than that, but we weren't allowed to go forward. Ultimately, the case was argued in the Third Circuit. In the Third Circuit, we lost in the beginning of January 2021 in a 2-1 split. So it was a 3-panel bench, and there was a strong dissent from Judge Roth, but 2 judges ruled against us. We then requested a petition for a rehearing en banc. More lawyerly stuff, but it's really, we're asking for a decision by the entire panel. We needed 4 judges to agree to a rehearing. We said, surely there are 4 judges. We only got 3, but still we got another strong dissent from 3 judges there. We then sought a review at the US Supreme Court, and the Solicitor General, who handles these cases on behalf of the government, waived the right to respond to our petition. And we were kind of disappointed because we thought that would be the first opportunity to hear from the Department of Justice what they were thinking, but they waived their right to respond. The court ultimately, as I said, didn't agree to hear the claim, but we did get 2 important editorials from the Washington Post and the San Francisco paper that now is the time for the Biden administration to take this positive step on harm reduction. So after our road to the Supreme Court ended, we went back to the district court. Remember, I said we had these other claims, the religious freedom claim and the Commerce Clause claim. Well, we added also a free exercise claim, and I'm happy to talk about the details of those claims, but I realize this isn't necessarily an audience of lawyers, so I will spare you that. But we're now back in federal court on those claims. And the good news is that we are now in productive conversations with the Department of Justice. Those conversations have been so productive that we have agreed twice now to extend the date by which the government must respond to our complaint. And so our goal is that we end up resolving the Safe House case with a policy, with an agreement that allows any municipality that wants to move forward to move forward. You know, I think we're at this place where we see our brave, wonderful friends in New York said, okay, we're just going to open. We're going to save lives and we're going to do that. But we're now at this inconsistent point with the government. They can't say, all right, we're going to stand down in New York. We're going to let them do their great work, but we're going to fight Philly. Like, you know, Philadelphians are worth saving too. So we are optimistic that we will finally hear a real commitment from the Biden administration on where they stand on this issue. And so the new deadline is March 7th. So mark your calendars, and we will be reporting back on that. I think that the last point I want to make briefly, please show the second slide, is that supervised consumption is not going to solve the overdose crisis. It's not going to restore people's lives. It's not going to improve neighborhoods, but it's going to make things better. And better is good. Better is harm reduction. This cartoon was drawn by Signe Wilkinson from the Philadelphia Inquirer. And as an aside, she told me that she was undecided about where she stood on supervised injection until she heard our court hearing and she heard Jose testify. She heard the arguments of the government and she said, yeah, supervised injections are better. So I'll end with that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So we have a bunch of questions in the chat. I'm actually going to use my privileges as moderator here to ask the first one, which is, Jose and Rhonda, can you talk a little bit for people who haven't been to Kensington, what the role of Prevention Point is there and how, Jose, you being ED of Prevention Point really gave you kind of a head start with community engagement around, getting all of this set up?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we had, look, Prevention Point is, we started off as the only sanctioned syringe services program for the city of Philadelphia. There are multiple now, but, not not sanctioned by the city. So we have that distinction. So, to give people sort of a sense of like who we're serving, we see about 25,000 people annually unduplicated here at Prevention Point alone. So it's a fairly large syringe services program that translates into several 100,000 exchanges. We gave a little over 7.5 million syringes last year to give you the context. So because we are a large syringe services program, we already had the network of community folks that we needed to talk to. We knew who we needed to talk to. We already had the relationship with the city. We already had the relationship with our elected officials. And so that's sort of what helped us get to the next step, was when we were thinking through the process of the mayor's task force, this recommendation came up. It was really natural that Prevention Point be in the forefront. What prevented us from taking the additional steps to say, yeah, we would do it, was when the government sued us and basically threatened to take everything away. And it was just that. It was, we're coming to get your buildings, we're coming to get your supplies, we're coming to get you. And we made a decision to form Safe House out of protection, basically, for the harm reduction services that we provide to all of these folks.
And I think that's a really important point that I haven't heard a lot of people talk about, is a lot of the time finding a place for these sites comes down to having a landlord or somebody to basically buy a property that they're willing to forfeit in the event that the feds take it, which, they have threatened to do. So hopefully, without a federal law change, I think that's always going to be something that local jurisdictions have to contend with.
agree, and to that point, I will say that has been the ongoing struggle for us in the movement here in Philadelphia, right? We've had a couple of landlords who had personal, experiences with people in their families, right? And when it really, when the pressure's on, it's on, and people decided to back out sometimes. And I think that's a really good point.
So switching a little bit to a legal question, Rhonda, what were the themes on which the dissents were based? The pro Safe House dissents.
Right. So starting with the original declaratory judgment in our favor, it was all about purpose, right? It's clear that the crack house statute talks about you may not maintain the premises for these prohibited purposes. The judge at the district court found we weren't doing that. We weren't trying. Our purpose was not to do those impermissible things. The dissent at the Third Circuit found the same thing, that wasn't our purpose. Judge Roth, who wrote the dissent in a very fiery response at the oral argument, told the U.S. attorney that not only did she not agree, she thought that all the cases that he cited had also been decided incorrectly. And so it was really about purpose. And that notion is that if you're to accomplish a lawful purpose, if there's some incidental illegal activity, that doesn't make your purpose illegal. So some of you may be aware of this idea of housing first. And so it's a housing program sponsored by the federal government in which people who are in active use can come in. They're not required to be sober when they walk in the door, but they get this federal housing. And so it's recognized there will be some activity on their premises which violates the law, use of controlled substances, but that because the purpose is not an impermissible purpose, it can go forward. Same argument around Safe House.
Thank you. Next question is about community engagement, and I'm actually going to combine two questions. So can you both just talk a little bit about at what point community residents were engaged, and you know, how did kind of community support wax and wane throughout all of these legal decisions? And then kind of a sub question to that is, did you work with the faith community at all? And how did you engage them? And what was their role in this process?
Well, you know, as I said earlier, when I was doing the intro, for us, we engage folks early in the conversation, right? During, first of all, during the meetings that were held by the mayor's task force, there were a ton of community folks that were on the task force itself. You know, experts, community folks. I mean, you know, that sort of started the conversation to make an official recommendation that the city would sort of stand by it. And I think, you know, as I said, we did in Kensington, since we had the network and Prevention Point knew who the players were, we decided to put people on a plane and take them to Toronto, right? And so we thought that those were all good faith efforts to have people informed. People needed to see, touch, feel, smell a overdose prevention site, and that was the community engagement. And in addition, we had a study that was conducted by Drexel to sort of talk about the perceptions. But and for the most part, they did a local, you know, they did it in Kensington. So the zip codes were restricted. You had to live in the zip code. And it was, you know, pretty much overwhelming support. I think where it became difficult is you have a smaller but louder group that was MIMBY, basically. You know, we're not having this in our community. And that was, I think, some of the more difficult parts of the conversations. And Rhonda, I don't know if you want to chime in any more than that, but.
Yeah. Thanks, Jose. You know, I think that when we talk about community, we need to really get a sense of who is community, what we mean by that. So after we announced that we wanted to open initially in South Philadelphia, there was a thought that it's a smaller area, fewer people, a more manageable rollout. After we made that announcement that, as Jose said, was met with some loud opposition, we started to look at who was responding to us. And so in a really informal survey. So for the folks who research these things professionally, you know, my apologies up front, but we got about 350 responses. And that would be through text messages, phone calls, emails. And of those 350 responses, they were overwhelmingly in support of Safe House, or more, and a large section within those that were not opposed was a large group that said, look, I don't know if this is a good idea or not, but I know what's happening now is a terrible idea. We must do better. So we have this group of responses. On this side, not left, political left, you know, on one side is people who are saying like they should all die and you should die with them. On this side, we have people like, what's wrong with you? Open it immediately, you know, don't be afraid of the government or anyone else. And then, you know, people are like, yeah, we love this, we support this. And then, you know, we don't know, but we need to do better. So I think it's important to take into consideration what community actually means. We heard lots of people from South Philadelphia who wanted it in their neighborhood. With regard to faith, so we filed, people who were supporters of Safe House filed Friends of the Court briefs, and there was a consistent group of faith leaders, probably somewhere between 20 and 40 representatives of different faiths, different congregations that supported Safe House. And they looked closely at their religious tenets and said, we can't walk away when we can save lives.
And I'll add that we have 3 clergy on our advisory board as well.
That's awesome. I'm going to go rogue and ask another question because you talked about it a little bit. It seems like there was some research that happened formally and informally that really influenced kind of how these events unfolded. So as a jurisdiction that's kind of just starting down this path, do you have any recommendations for us about how we should focus our research capacity, or like what information would be really helpful to commission as part of a research study?
Rhonda, you want to?
Sure. I mean, I think that the research project that Jose referenced that Drexel did was really solid, that they asked people, we're going to put this in your neighborhood. You live here, you work here, you own a business here, you have financially invested in this. What do you think about this? And those people who were asked absolutely agreed with it. They said, we need this, we need something to change. Now in Philadelphia, we had people who said, the methodology was wrong, it was biased researchers. So like, you're always going to find people who are going to find fault with something if that's what they're oriented to do. You know, people are going to say they don't believe science. You know, that happens. But I think that studies like that show what do the people who really live in those neighborhoods think? Because what we experienced is a lot, you know, a few people yelling loudly, but that the people who needed it were like living their lives, working their jobs. They were not coming out to public meetings or sending us hate mail.
Yeah, that's helpful. So this is the last question that I'm seeing in the chat. So if anybody has any additional questions, please put them in the chat now. I think this is kind of about the safe house model. And have you all envisioned, like, have you given any thought to what happens if this model gets widely adopted and is implemented differently in different jurisdictions? And I think the person that asked this question was asking, you know, what if it's not operating correctly? Like, is it possible that, you know, one bad actor could kind of ruin this for everyone who's trying to implement this model?
Jose, I'll talk about our idea with the agreement. So our hope is that we can reach agreement with the Department of Justice that will allow all municipalities to go forward, and that our goal is to set the bar so low, and that doesn't mean what perhaps it sounds like, but to have it as broad and expansive as possible so that all municipalities can say, yeah, we are doing these basic fundamental things. And so that other folks who say, well, you know, I don't have the space to do an immediate referral to an MAT provider, they can still provide this service. And, you know, the agreement we reach, God willing, won't bind anyone else, but it will give others the opportunity if they want to. So there may be folks who say, you know what, we don't need government approval. We're good as we are, and we're just going to keep moving along. And that's great too. So we're really just trying to create a floor. I'm always like floor and ceiling, a floor for which people can say, okay, this is like the very minimum you have to do, but keeping in mind that the minimum we want to be very low, because we don't want to create something that could work in Philadelphia because of our size and capacity, but doesn't work in Burlington, Vermont.
That makes sense. All right, does anybody have any additional questions? Going through the chat, all of the DC specific ones, I think we're gonna kind of put in one category and discuss at the end. But I think that's it. So thank you both so much. We really appreciate this. And I feel like this was already great. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so next on the agenda is Rhode Island. So we have annajaneyoon here, who's a data analyst at Project Weber Renew, and she's going to talk to us about the efforts underway in Providence, Rhode Island.
Hello, can you all hear me? I can't see you, so I'm just going to assume yes until I'm told otherwise.
Yep. Yeah, you're good.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much. So hi, everyone. My name is annajaneyoon. Most people call me AJ. That's great. I am originally city of Baltimore, so have some feelings about DC, but it's all good. But now currently live in Rhode Island. And if you could go to the next slide, please. The next slide as well. Thank you. So just to talk a little bit about who I am, I work at an organization that's the state's largest harm reduction service provider. We provide many similar services to that of Prevention Point, but I'm also a registered lobbyist, and I started a political action committee specifically focused on drug policy reform called the Substance Use Policy Education and Recovery PAC, or Super PAC, as we like to call it, but we're not actually a super PAC. We are a scrappy organization of volunteers who advocates at the state level for drug policies that uphold health and human dignity. So I'm coming at this both as working at a service provider organization that's very interested in opening an overdose prevention site, or what we're calling harm reduction centers. I can talk more about that, as well as someone who worked on the state level legislation that allowed Rhode Island to become the first state in the country to officially authorize the use of supervised consumption. And that law passed in July of last year. So I'm going to talk a bit about that process and what that process was like, because it's a bit different than the Philadelphia approach, and it's going to be also very different from the New York City approach. So I think this is just a different way of a different way of approaching the same topic. And I'm hoping that by different people taking these different approaches, we can ultimately open these facilities, which New York has done, and save lives, because that's our ultimate goal. So this is just one of the venues to do that. So if you could please go to the next slide. So you all know what we're talking about. Again, we call them harm reduction centers. That name came out a few years ago as a way to get away from safe injection facility, both because of people's feelings about that term, and also because we do want to allow different modes of substance consumption on site, especially as more and more people are overdosing and unfortunately dying from use of stimulants, including smoking stimulants. So this is a place where people may safely consume pre-obtained substances. In addition, we wanted to talk about harm reduction centers as a way of focusing on other services that may be at these facilities, services, many of which that already exist, services around syringe service provision, referrals to resources, peer support, case management, other types of things as well. Next slide, please. I'm not going to talk about the benefits of harm reduction centers because you're here. I'm assuming that everyone here is committed to saving lives. If you could please go to the next slide. So in July of 2021, our governor signed this bill into law, making it the first law in the country that authorizes the use of supervised consumption. Next slide, please. And I can talk specifically more about what the law does, as well as our strategy to get there, which I hope can be useful if people are working at different levels. So the law officially authorizes the use of harm reduction centers and supervised consumption, and that's especially important not only to allow the legal protections and affirmative commitment that we can do this, but also because in Rhode Island, we have a state level version of the crack house statute. And so while it isn't officially repealing that, it is allowing a different avenue for supervised consumption. It also directed our Department of Health to promulgate regulations by March 2022. They're actually a little ahead of schedule, which is amazing. And those regulations, which I'll talk a little bit more about later, are going to be ready by February 16th. So just in a few weeks. And we really took a very authorization approach where this is going to be a highly regulated facility. And with that, it has the protections that come with being a regulated facility, with official regulations, with an application process, et cetera. It also appointed a committee to advise the Department of Health on what those regulations will look like. And I think that that committee really did a great job of trying to make sure that the facility would actually be able to be implemented by a community-based organization and wouldn't be so medicalized that I say it would be like an abortion clinic in Texas. Not that those exist anymore, but where what they do is they just make it so there's so many regulations that it's impossible to access. But instead, the committee really pushed for it to be more accessible to community-based organizations. And I'd also say the committee pushed for other important things. Like one thing that my colleague who is a Black man and a former crack cocaine smoker, really pushed for was the active inclusion of inhalation as part of the regulation. So it's not like you can do this, but it's like you must do this. And his point is that if he, back in the day when he was using substances, he wouldn't have been able to go into one of these facilities, and he felt like it was a really important racial equity issue. And so his advocacy pushed for the inclusion of inhalation and other forms of consumption in these sites. The legislation also provides a lot of state level protections for liability, whether it's liability of the landlord, liability of the person who uses the facility, the person who operates the facility, and whatnot. There were some compromises with this piece of legislation as well. One is it was very clear that we wouldn't be able to use state funding for it. So we were very clear that any funding for such a facility wouldn't be state funding, but would rather come from foundations, private donors, other places, so that lawmakers could say, oh, no taxpayer dollars are going to this. And then there were a few other compromises as well. One is a 2-year pilot. So the law does have a 2-year sunset. That was a compromise to sort of give lawmakers cover. And we're hoping to actually repeal that pilot this year or next year, so that we can give more time to show evidence and whatnot, and not just have to close a facility once one opens. And then we also had a compromise that the city or town council must approve the location of the facility. So this was something so that lawmakers across the state, including in jurisdictions where there might not necessarily be a facility, could, vote for it and be like, oh, well, the city or town council must approve it. So that we did that knowing that the city of Providence, the capital where I am based, and probably the facility, the location where it will initially open up, that we did have more city council support than not. So next slide, please. So a big question about how Rhode Island did it at the state level. Here are some pictures from various events we had. We had a vigil last February to recognize everyone who died in 2020 from overdose, which included medical providers carrying caskets. And then we also had a few rallies at the State House as well, which is the picture on the right. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the timeline. This was a maybe 3-year effort, I want to say, 3 or 4 year effort. But this, there had been many decades of work that had happened. Rhode Island was one of the first states to decriminalize the possession of a syringe. And we enacted Good Samaritan laws pretty early. So this is all advocacy that's built for many, many decades of work. This started really when the Rhode Island Medical Society started convening working groups on this topic. And then the bill was first introduced in spring of 2019. It didn't pass the first year. Then in spring of 2020, it passed the Senate and not the House. And then there were several reports that came out from various levels of government, the City of Providence, our Executive Office of Health and Human Services, that did make formal recommendations for harm reduction centers in their reports, which I think sort of gave cover for entities like our Department of Health to get on board, and that ultimately and a lot of advocacy on the ground really propelled it to get passed in spring of 2021. Next slide, please. So there was a lot of things that allowed this to happen. One is that myself and many other people were a really consistent lobbying presence at our state house. So Rhode Island, a lot of things happen at the state level because we're really tiny. We're not as tiny as DC, but I imagine it's a similar type of feel where a lot of people know each other and there's a pretty small community, especially within the harm reduction, public health world as well, the recovery world. So we were able to leverage a lot of those connections to help lobby at the state level. We had a lot of support from folks at like Brown University, who we have some researchers there who are experts on safe consumption and have evaluated models in Canada. And so when lawmakers asked questions, we could really point to very local experts, which I think helped build buy-in. We really did a lot of appeal to people's personal connection to this topic. So a lot of lawmakers have lost members of their family to overdose. They understood that fentanyl made the situation much more urgent, that COVID made the situation much more urgent. And I think a lot of people just really wanted to sort of share their experience, have someone to listen to them. And then when they said, what can we do about this? We were able to offer harm reduction centers as a response to that, rather than us going in and saying, you have to do this thing. So we really took an approach of listening. And I think because people had that personal connection, we were able to build those relationships and grow that. And then in addition, some other things happened. There was new leadership at our state level, so a new Speaker of the House. And there was also a new committee structure at the state level. So in terms of our legislative things, so we had a new health committee in the House, and that the head of that health committee was an EMT from an area that is heavily impacted by overdose. If he had personally he responds to overdoses, many times a week. And so I think he understood that what we're doing isn't working and we need a new approach. Next steps, please, or next slide. So many of the barriers that you all, I'm sure, have experienced. NIMBYism, especially, sometimes there were times when a certain entity would say, oh, we want to do this. And they were trying to show that there were people who were committed to actually implementing it. But then the specific lawmaker of that jurisdiction would then be like, oh, I don't want this in my district. And so that sort of backfired a little bit. All the enabling language, this idea that this would, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Very real concerns that we weren't undoing the racism of previous drug policies, and specifically that this was going to be mostly to save white people. And I think that there were several things that we did to address that. One, I think the focus on racial equity in terms of the regulations is going to be huge. I think it will continue to be huge in terms of the implementation. I'm also excited that in the same year that we did this, we also defelonized drug possession. So we made drug possession from a felony to a misdemeanor, which I think we also said, this is another thing we're doing in conjunction with this to really address the legacy of criminalization of people who use drugs. And then there's all the barriers of federal law, which I know my colleagues in Philadelphia talked more about. Next slide, please. So we, after the law passed, the Department of Health really took a very proactive approach to the regulatory process. They hit the ground running. It was a very tight timeline given all the levels of bureaucracy that need to go through the regulations. They had several rounds of public comment. They really reached out to get feedback. They had the advisory committee, which I mentioned earlier, really informed the process. And those regulations will be promulgated within the next few weeks. Next slide, please. And I wanted to talk more about the regulations because I think these might be of interest to entities that are interested in starting or have started, but don't necessarily have a state level regulatory process yet. So all the licensure is going to be through our Department of Health. And they actually started with regulations around birthing centers, which I think is interesting as a kind of medical, but kind of outside the traditional medical model. And then so they took those regulations and then they loosened them a bit so that there is less need for medical presence on site. As part of the regulations, there must be municipal approval, which tracks with the law, which says that city or town councils need to approve. And they must have an inhalation component. There's specific regulations about what that process will look like. They can be mobile and/or brick and mortar. So it doesn't say you need to be one or the other. They can have qualified personnel. They've broadened that definition so it can be peers or nurses or case managers, and they must have a medical director, but that person can be on call. So there doesn't necessarily need to be medical staff that are physically there. And then there's also some services that are required, needle exchange, harm reduction and whatnot, but they did scale back. So there isn't a need for treatment on site. There isn't a need for some more cost and service intensive things that people may or may not want to implement. And then they also rolled back some of the data collection as well. Initially, they were going to have a lot of identifying information, and whatnot. And then really they scaled it back based on community feedback that de-identified information was fine, something like a unique identifier, something that other syringe service providers do so that people could really feel comfortable in the space. And I have a link here to the regulations, which if these slides can be sent around, if the regulations are helpful. Next slide, please. So I think, this is different than, again, like I said, the approaches of Philadelphia and New York. I think all the approaches are really, I really hope can be complementary. I know New York actually opening has put a lot of wind in our sails, and that's been really great to learn more about that model so that once we get to the implementation stage, we can really leverage some of the learning there. So we do have the benefits of having the sort of state level protections. These protections really sort of legitimize, I don't know if that's the right term, but they really formalize the whole process, and they do allow for multiple sites. So because it is a really top-down procedure, any city, any provider can apply for one of these licenses. They're quite standardized, and as long as they go through the formal processes, they will be able to open. But the slower side is, it is slower. It is top down. It's, I know some places that are like, we just want to open. And unfortunately, because the regulations still haven't been promulgated yet, they officially can't open. And those state level protections only apply to the regulated facility. So if someone is operating a facility in their restroom, for example, those will not have all the legal protections because they didn't go through the regulatory process. Next slide. So we're, our next steps are that we're doing community organizing and engagement. There are a few entities that are interested in implementing the facilities. At this point, they're a little bit in a limbo because they're waiting for the regulations and the application process to get started. We're watching federal law and we're watching other states as well. So, and then we're also working on trying to get that 2-year pilot extended at the very least. And I included this graphic. I think it's funny because it makes me feel like our harm reduction center is going to be in a lighthouse, which I think would be kind of cool, kind of nautical. Next slide, please. So that's my contact information. I'm also happy to take any questions now.
Thank you so much. Everyone should put questions in the chat. I have a couple as usual to kick us off. The first one, so, I think the approach Rhode Island took is so unique. And I'm going to have a separate question about kind of the balance between regulations and accessibility. But even before we get to that, can you just talk a little bit like how much progress has been made towards actually opening a site? And it sounds like a lot of things are kind of hinging on these regulations coming out in March. But, do you know that are there places like ready to hit the ground running, the day after they come out, or like what's kind of this situation?
Yeah, absolutely. It feels a little bit like a chicken and egg because like people are waiting for the regulations, but people are also waiting for specific locations to do very targeted community outreach and not just do such broad community outreach. We're just going to get the kickback and not get the actual like targeted conversations and whatnot. So there are at least 2 organizations that have very publicly said we are ready, we are committed to opening. Both of those locations would need to do some building modifications to be able to have that be happening. Those locations are both in Providence. We have a lot of support from the mayor's office of Providence. We're still working on the city council, but again, we need to know the locations to know which city council people to focus on, so and whatnot.
And would a lot of those building modifications be around the inhalation requirement, or are there other things that need to happen?
Yeah, a bunch of them, they're in existing service provider organizations. Both of the organizations that are interested are medication assisted recovery organizations. And so it's about space. Part of that is about the inhalation. Both locations are both looking at either doing it within their current space or trying to acquire other space. So there's a few different potential pathways.
Great. And it seems like we have good questions in the chat. I'm going to ask one more possibly quick one. You talked a little bit about terminology and overdose prevention site versus harm reduction center. I first started working on this issue in like 2016, 2017. I've gone from safe injection site to supervised consumption to now we're using totally different terms. What was I'm assuming there is an intentional process behind choosing what to call it. Can you talk a little bit about that and kind of the pros and cons of different names that you thought about?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say it was intentional and also not that intentional. I think the conversation, it was decided, we knew that we wanted to move away from safe injection facility for some of the reasons I mentioned, and especially to expand it. And I think we wanted to focus less on the consumption piece and more around the comprehensive services that would be in such a facility. That still leaves several different terminologies. Someone came up with harm reduction center. I don't exactly remember the process, but I know that once we put it in the law, we sort of had to stick to it. So that we couldn't be lobbying and be like, support harm reduction centers. I mean, overdose prevention sites. I mean, so that has sort of anchored us a bit to that, for better or for worse.
Yeah, it's funny when you talk to different people, it's like you have to mutually agree on a term at the start of the conversation and just go with that. So that's interesting. So 2 questions in the chat around funding. So you made it clear that no taxpayer dollars are going to be used for this site. And I think that's true in a lot of jurisdictions. If that's the case, what funding has been secured from the centers, which philanthropic organizations, kind of how have you gone about looking for funding?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, it's part of the chicken and the egg sort of tangle of the specific locations, the specific organizations. We are looking at we have a private donor who's very interested in supporting this, where we've had some initial conversations with foundations as well. And then we also have found some creative ways to use additional funding. So for example, there's going to be a NIDA research study, which won't be able to support necessarily the operations of this, but is part of the synergistic package that is opening a site. And same with, I work for an organization that receives CDC funding to do street-based harm reduction outreach. And we were given authority that funding could be used to do some initial preliminary work, even if it wouldn't be able to support the safe consumption part of it. So we are trying to leverage the funding that currently exists for other harm reduction services, in addition to finding funding specifically for safe consumption.
Great. And you just kind of got at this, but can you talk about plans to evaluate these efforts? I know with like all of the amazing kind of academics you have in Rhode Island, I'm sure people are like knocking down your door. But is there a plan laid out yet?
Yeah, so I'm actually, I don't know all the specifics of the plan. I know that there's some interest in doing research in conjunction with New York to sort of do a comparison. I'm going to talk more with the researchers who are part of the team of that next week. So I don't have more specific things, but I do know that our research community has been really great at getting feedback around what that research could look like, communicating with us, being in partnership with us. So definitely excited to have folks in Rhode Island be part of that. And
this is a good question in the chat. Have you heard anything from the federal government?
Yeah, so that's interesting. I was talking about this with Rhonda a little bit. So I reached out to we've contacted our federal delegation of Congress people, which is 4 people, which I realized I was going to say that's not that many, but then I realized I'm talking to folks in DC and I'm sorry. And then so we talked to them and they sort of gave us the yeah, keep us updated in policy stuff. And then I also sent a very random email to our new US attorney. And I got an email that I thought was fine until I shared it with Rhonda. And she's like, this is amazing. And so warm, because they were like, yeah, we're following the regulations, balancing public health and public safety. They gave something that was vague, but not negative. And so I'm hopeful that as we move forward, that's the type of sentiment we can leverage.
And we just got 2 questions about cost. And you may not know this because I know you're not necessarily in the implementing organizations, but do you have any ballpark numbers, or even, how are different organizations going about even coming up with budgets for this? I'm sure it's very dependent on the specific models that they're using.
Yeah, I think it will be dependent on the specific models. It will be really dependent on if they need to buy or acquire a new building. I know one of the organizations is interested in initially having a mobile facility that's just parked in their parking lot just to get something up and running. And to clarify, I don't work for either of the 2 organizations that would be the main organization, but I do work for an organization that's very interested in partnering with both of them. because we are, already provide peer-based harm reduction services. So it would definitely be a partnership.
And how did you arrive at the 2-year pilot? And it sounds like, already it's looking like there needs to be more time. I know, especially to do any meaningful research study, you need more than 2 years for the most part. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so that 2-year sunset is like a pretty common time frame in terms of Rhode Island legislation and how sunsets work. They, again, like I said, they really threw that in as a compromise to get it over the finish line, which we're grateful they were that our legislative leaders were able to get that over the finish line, because that was not the case a few years ago, and really shows a lot of growth. So I think that was like their sort of last pass at being able to get it through, and so they really came up with the 2 years. That wasn't from us, but we do, like you said, we do want to get it extended. Especially if there's evaluation, and the 2 years starts from the beginning of the regulation. So the clock has not started.
That's good to know.
Yeah.
So speaking of the regulations, something I wanted to touch on is, it's very interesting that Rhode Island is taking this very regulated approach, where organizations have to apply, and it seems very controlled. And I think there is a tension there between like, hey, just open as fast as possible, let everyone come in, save as many lives as you can, like instantly. Can you talk just like a little bit about how that unfolded in Rhode Island? And I'm asking because, I imagine we'll have similar conversations, possibly some point here in DC. And, I assume that you weighed the pros and cons of going kind of bottom up or top down.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that this also started a few years ago. The conversation looked really different. There wasn't a place that was already open that just decided to open. We did decide to take a regulatory approach, I think in part because of the people who were initially around the table, which were medical providers and sort of public health researchers. So it did come from more of that vein. And it was because we were doing it as state law, it made more sense to regulate it at the state level. I mean, everything in Rhode Island is at the state level because we don't really have other jurisdictions, but it did make it was strategically chosen because it made it a much easier conversation with lawmakers to say this will be regulated, this will be controlled, this will be whatever, rather than like, we're just going to open something up. Although I definitely hear and understand the desire to open something up immediately. I get it.
Okay, and I think our last question in the chat, so if you have any other questions, put them in the chat now. Have you done any kind of projections about lives being saved, or, like projected usage or anything like that?
We have not done any projected usage. Researchers at Brown have added questions that if people would use a harm reduction center into more recent epidemiological research and gotten feedback that way, but we've not done any like bigger scale calculations as well. And we found that most people would use them, and not surprisingly, most people's concerns were law enforcement preventing people from, entering the facility or feeling safe at the facility.
Okay. All right, I will ask one more question and then we'll move on to New York. And we talked about this a little bit already, but this whole role of not using taxpayer dollars to fund these sites, I've seen this come up in jurisdictions all over the country who are considering this, like, oh, don't worry, we won't use anybody's taxpayer dollars. Are you finding that argument is mostly for lawmakers, or are people actually, like people in the community actually making that request? Because it seems like it might be more of like a appeal to lawmakers thing, but I don't know if you're hearing it come up from the ground. And Rhonda and Jose, you might have insight into this as well.
Yeah, I'll take a first draft and then hand it over to Philadelphia. So I definitely think it is more for lawmakers so that they feel like they can go back to their constituents and say this. I do think that there are a very few, but very vocal number of constituents who are saying, you can't use my money to, my tax dollars for this. I really do think, though, it is cover for the lawmakers.
And I would agree that, a lot of the decisions we made in Philadelphia was about kind of what will sell, what will people accept? So I think that the taxpayer dollars was a good start. I also think that, and I don't know, I'm interested in talking to AJ perhaps offline about this, but what we're envisioning in Philadelphia is that once we get the basic consumption supervision piece done, there's a whole lot of other services that we would like to offer, which are services that our city health department is paying for now. Like a peer navigator, how do I get this person who wants this service? How do I get them connected? And our position has been, which has been mostly well received in Philadelphia, is that if they pay for a peer navigator to assist a person to move from place A to place B, does it really matter where that conversation happens? Because in all reality, many of those conversations may be happening after a person has recently consumed. In this instance, the peer navigator may know it with certainty as opposed to a really good guess.
And one other question actually for both of you. How have you engaged public safety? So mostly police, state and local in these conversations, and how has that gone?
I can take a first go at this. I know that we have started to have initial conversations with the Providence police. I know the city has really been leading those efforts. So it's like sort of city to city rather than service provider to city. And I think they have really wanted to be part of the process and said that they would not stop the implementation of a site. They did have some thoughts about where it should and shouldn't be, and I think had some pretty strong opinions about that. Specifically places that are more business oriented versus other places. They really didn't want them in our business downtown center, even though that is like, if you look on a map, that is a huge overdose hotspot. So we have started to have those conversations, and I think, are weighing how much communication and engagement that looks like.
Jose, do you want to talk about law enforcement? Or do you want me to do it?
Well, I think, we engage law enforcement from the beginning, basically. I mean, I think it's something that we had ongoing meetings with police leadership in the city. I think Rhonda could give you some more interesting stories around our relationship with them. But it's, I think for the most part, up until sort of when we were getting ready to open in South Philly, they were basically very productive conversations and similar to what just got described.
The only thing I'll add to that is, we had those conversations. We believe those conversations are crucial. And, some of the conversations we had when we hoped to open last year, we felt that our discussions, our confidential conversations, got back to certain communities in opposition pretty quickly. And we think that there may have been some police department officials who didn't support our ideas. And so because they couldn't stop what their boss, the mayor, was telling them to do, they decided to recruit who they saw as the community to have some opposition. I think that will happen in any instance, but it's just something to keep in mind.
Yeah, that's important and sounds a little dramatic, honestly. Okay, well, thank you so much for that presentation. I think we will move on to New York. So from New York City, we have Kaylin C., who is the Senior Director of Programs at On Point, New York City. So hi, Kaylin, I will let you take it away.
Great. Hi, everyone. Thank you for this. Hi, Jose. Hi, Rhonda. Hi, everybody. I have two slides to share if anybody has not seen either site, but I thought at this point, probably most people have seen pictures. So if there's an interest in seeing the peer or consumer site and the East Harlem more traditional medical model site, I can share some images of those. Let me know. Wanted to give, oops. Oh, yes, please show images. Is it okay if I share my screen and show some images while I talk?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, all right, cool. Just bear with me here for a sec. I'll start with just going through some of our data as of closing on the 26th. So we should have a new set of data coming in today for the 27th, but so you're getting mostly the latest and greatest. Oops, let me just stop share for now. We have 606 registered users at both sites. We've seen just under 6,000 visits at both sites. We've had 120 overdoses at both sites. 82 of those overdoses were at the Washington Heights site. 38 were at the East Harlem site. And that's a really interesting kind of early finding that we're looking at, especially since Washington Heights has a lower number of registered users quite significantly by about half. Yet they are turning out the majority of the overdoses. So of the 606 registered users, 205 are at Washington Heights. And of the 120 overdoses, 82 occurred in Washington Heights. 401 registered users in East Harlem, accounting for 38 of the overdoses. The vast majority of the overdoses we are seeing are opiate or depressant related overdoses, but we do also classify an overamp or any instance where regulation of neurological, cardiac, or respiratory symptoms or behavioral symptoms is causing jeopardy to life and limb. We do consider those overamps. So of the 120 overdoses I've just described, 88 were opiate and depressant related overdoses and 34 were overamps involving strokes, seizure activity, cardiac involvement, or dangerous behavioral presentation. In terms of the Washington Heights population, it's a much younger population, very high volume injection population, a lot of polysubstance injection, primarily speedballs. And in the East Harlem location, it's a very heavy smoking population, which is why Harlem is going to be getting the dedicated smoking room. Right now that it has smoking vestibules and smoking is permitted on site in both locations. Slightly older population in East Harlem with a significant representation from veterans. So just some kind of early interesting findings around who is using the site and the impact of the site on those populations.
Do we want to start by showing the video and then getting back into data? Or did you want to do
sure.
that
I sort of
afterwards?
forgot we were going to do that.
Totally fine. Emily,
Go ahead.
Is it queued up?
Yes, Colin, are you ready to share?
Yes, one moment. Let me properly share my volume as well. Give me one moment.
Okay, awesome.
The CDC reported a record number of overdose deaths in the midst of the pandemic.
It's an issue that's hitting hard in our area, especially New York City.
That's why we launched yesterday the nation's first overdose prevention centers.
What we knew, what the rest of the New York City knew, what the rest of the country knew, was that people were using drugs and dying alone in public bathrooms all over the city, McDonald's, Starbucks, underpasses, subway stations, parks. And we knew that people were using in our bathrooms as well. So this is one of 2 overdose prevention centers that we built, and this is the East Harlem, more traditional medical model with the booths that you would expect to see. These are some of the supplies. So the safer injection supplies, the sniffing supplies, and then the smoking supplies. Surviving your drug use means getting through it with your body, your brain, and your heart intact, which means we have to teach people, and I know this sounds controversial and a little counterintuitive, but we have to teach people to be the best drug users they can be while they're using. People sit here. The mirror is really the most important feature of this booth. What the booth allows is for Race, who's back there, if I were to start to have an overdose, he can see it happen without having to be up in my space. And these are the overdose carts that I was mentioning. This is the micro doses of naloxone that we're using now.
I come in here to this program because I think it saves lives. It does. I use an injection needle and I use heroin and cocaine. They explain things to you. They ask you what you need. And that's a big difference in going to the street and having to get it yourself or using something dirty and getting an infection or getting sick.
I was a cocaine user and weed user. It basically, they don't push you to stop. It is, like I say, they're a safe haven. They're trying to be, keep you safe in what you're doing. And they're participating in helping people, not kicking them when they're down.
When I first heard about it, I get a text, then I start getting emails with photos of inside of this clinic where they showed they had hypodermic needles, setups where people were could come in and receive injections. When I spoke to people who were in that block, they told me that that injection site had been going on for years. So many people weren't aware that it was happening. Any kind of facility of that, of serving that population, so close to schools, and knowing that right across the street, there's a school there.
We do not want our streets like this. I do not care what that say. People living in different old Harlem and New Harlem. You should be outside as outrageous.
The streets started shifting and changing in terms of people's sense of safety and comfort and exposure to certain types of behavior. From a public health perspective, it seems to me that one would think about the consequences of concentrating a service like that or any service in one area. I'm not saying that all of it is bad, there's no redeeming value, there's no need for them. I'm not suggesting that at all. The community now is fighting against each other and not addressing the policymakers. There's some addressing of that, but not at the level and not with the same kind of passion.
Some people are saying, it's going to bring more drug dealing. We don't see it. They're going to bring people from other areas. Maybe, we haven't seen it yet. So the answer to that is open more in other areas so that folks can actually be close to where they live and stay alive. We had 4 of the 5 DAs in the boroughs sign off on this. It's a big deal. Those 4 boroughs should have centers like ours. I've been on the phone every day with partners in Baltimore and San Francisco and LA, like people from all over the place. But welcome to our hood.
And so I want to just learn more from you all. Okay.
We're confident that this is going to continue. We're confident that more are going to open in New York City and beyond. People want to say treatment and everything else. If they're not alive, they can't participate in treatment and be here.
So that happened. Yeah, it's a good piece. It's funny when we were I was talking with the organizers for this call. I was lamenting the Miss Stokely at the end, and how something that we're all going to deal with when we open our sites is this conflation of our services with the methadone industrial complex and medical redlining and all of this kind of stuff. And Ms. Stokely is one of the founders of the East Harlem Neighborhood Coalition, who was one of the most vocal detractors to our site. And we now have officially, through our work with them, they no longer want to be contacted by the media to be one of the detractors. They understand the differences between our services and what we're trying to do and some of the larger systemic issues that the neighborhood is facing, which we agree are a problem. So really it speaks to sort of like a not especially nuanced understanding in some cases of what these programs do and the way they're intended to function within the larger tapestry of a neighborhood versus some of these really deeply entrenched, big systemic issues that we are all collectively fighting against, including us and Ms. Stokely. So it's a great example of how community engagement and bringing people in to see the sites in person. Somebody mentioned this earlier. I think it was Jose, needing to see and feel and smell and breathe the center as a really powerful means of shifting people's perceptions and changing people's minds. So now they're on side, whereas previously they definitely weren't. I think I've covered most of the data. I think most folks are fairly aware that in New York, we capitalized on a very unique and very time-bound political moment to make this happen. We did an assessment of risk at a city, state, and federal level, looking at a variety of factors, including who's on their way out the door, who's coming in. We looked at Philly and Rhode Island and what you experienced as some important federal precedents to sort of help us predict and read tea leaves and figure out what was going to happen to us. And in consideration of those 3 sets of analysis that we did, we decided, yep, we're okay. We're going to take this calculated risks and we're going to just stick our necks out and open. I want to be clear that all we have, and I make it sound like it's not much, and I understand that it is, but really all we have is a letter from a mayor who is no longer in power. That's what we got. So far I look outside and every time I say this, I knock wood a million times, the sky hasn't fallen. We're trying very hard. There were some big strategic moves that we've made over the last 6 or 7 years to make opening possible and to prepare to open with this, some maneuvering we did to allow us to open and then to prevent the shuttering of the sites once we did open. And certainly running the unsanctioned sites for 6 to 7 years at both sites was a big part of that strategic readiness. Somebody mentioned landlords, somebody mentioned buildings. We do have 30-year leasehold condo agreements in both of our buildings. We fought for that expressly because we knew we were moving towards opening these sites. Having very committed and special landlords is consistent in the story of opening safe consumption sites all around the world. We're no different. We have 2 very special human beings in our landlords who said, "You're going to do what in my building?" And then said, "Okay, that sounds insane, but I also believe that this is the right thing to do." This was true for Insight in Canada. It was one very special person who, amid that crisis, said, "You can have my building." And the same thing happened here. Community engagement has been a years-long process towards this goal, but not in the obvious sense that I think people immediately sort of jump to when we say community engagement. For us, it was a lot of really asserting our leadership on this issue and really dictating programming, services, and solutions in arenas that maybe we traditionally weren't necessarily holding a seat at the table. So we kind of tried to fake it till we made it and assert ourselves as leaders on this issue with the police and with the health department, with the city, etc. I think I'll pause there for a sec and just see if there are any questions. But I think the Rhode Island and Philly crews really covered the vast majority of it. So I'll add whatever I can, and I'm grateful to be here.
Yeah, and we have a lot of questions in the chat. So I will just get us started. In DC, we have data that's showing that most of our overdoses are happening in residences. It's usually like 60 or 70%. Is that the case in the neighborhoods where you are? And do you have any strategies to engage that population that's kind of most at risk and often, might be using a loan in their house or at a friend's house and getting them, engaging them and getting them to come into a harm reduction site?
Yeah, I love that question, and nobody ever likes the answer. Safe consumption is the most infinitely scalable and adaptable. So in these, are we talking about a congregate housing setting like apartment buildings?
It's usually like private residences. So it could be somebody in their apartment or their house, something like that.
One thing that we're working towards, and once we catch our breath from what we have just done, is getting into safer consumption in a housing setting. Again, it's not new, right? So America needs to really stop being so behind. Supportive housing for people who are active in their use is a best practice in many other parts of the world. We all believe in the housing first model. Why housing first can't extend to base harm reduction principles is our next fight. If all of the data in many jurisdictions shows what you've just outlined, which is still the vast majority of overdose fatality occurrence is in homes behind closed doors and people are alone, we need to look at two very important things. Why? That's fear. If you're revealed to be a drug user in the United States, you lose everything. You lose your job, you lose your house, you lose your kids, you're kicked out of school, you can't drive, nothing. So we have this culture of concealment and consequence, and the consequence is fatality. If we're really interested in addressing that, we've got to deal first with every public health message that we're giving people outside of harm reduction, saying hide everything about your drug use. And then we need to offer these services in situ where these fatalities are taking place. So it's incorporating safer consumption into housing settings. Other jurisdictions are doing it, it works. Safer consumption is integrated into hospitals, clinics, community centers, senior homes. This is, it's not a new tool, which you know. But yeah, there's some really interesting places we can go with this now that we're all getting this more momentum than we even had before, and centering these ideas and pushing these ideas through, because we are the leaders in this. We do know what works. So a little bit of less deference to health, capital H, and a little bit more us pushing our ideas forward.
Yeah, that's great. The overdose rates that you talked about at the beginning seem high compared to numbers, both like from what we know, just kind of out in the world and Vancouver. Is that something that you expected, or are you working with like particularly high risk people, or what do you think explains that?
Love that question. Love whoever asked it. So remember, we were running an unsanctioned program, a fairly large unsanctioned program for 6 years at both locations before we opened the official program, which means we had already outreached and engaged the people that needed this particular service in our neighborhoods. So really our intake and our launch period is unique, even when you look at the larger landscape of safe consumption and the 35 years of research that we can point to. Uptake in our site was immediate, and it really is because we were already doing it. So I don't know if that sort of answers your question a little bit. The other thing that I think is interesting about our data, again, points to the unsanctioned site. When you look at overdose rates in Washington Heights and East Harlem, they are lower than you would expect to see given other factors in those neighborhoods. And that's because of the impact of the unsanctioned overdose program. So people are saying, why, but there's lower overdose occurrence and da, 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 da. Well, because we're dealing with it. Because we're dealing with it in-house. And our staff are trained at both locations, even at the consumer-led model, our staff are trained to intervene at the level of a registered nurse. So of the 120, I just saw there was another overdose downstairs, I just got a message. So of the 121 overdoses we've intervened in, we've called the ambulance once. All of that has been diverted from the emergency system and the hospital system. The health department will eventually learn about those overdoses when we submit that stack of paperwork we're all so familiar with when we work with the health department. But getting the epi data around overdose occurrence in these sites is a year and a half, an 18-month lag. So what you're missing there is the impact of the unsanctioned programs. When you look at it from the other side, you're looking at just how dire the epidemic is.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so I have two questions that stem from that, one from the chat and one from me. The one from me first, you're talking about data, similar to the questions we asked the other presenters. Is there a plan for a formal evaluation of what's going on? The fact that this has been operational for so long before it was like technically operational, does that impact your evaluation plan? And what's kind of the conversation around that right now?
Yes. So I always, when this comes up, I always just really want to be very conscientious and considerate and thankful to our friends in Rhode Island who are allowing us to piggyback on their NIDA study, which is wonderful, and we're so grateful. It offers us a level of federal protection, which we really need, and allows us to join this really robust and thoughtful study and comparison. So there's that. We're also partnering with New York University. Thank you. I see you, AJ. Thank you. We're also partnering with New York University here in New York to evaluate and compare the sites against each other, opening 2 sites, a peer model, a consumer-led model, and a more traditional medical model. As many of you have heard me say before, was very strategically intentional. The objective is to compare those sites from a cost perspective, an impact perspective, connection to care perspective, et cetera, community impact, and hand over a blueprint to the rest of the country based on what they think they can stand up in their jurisdiction and with their very unique challenges.
And kind of a somewhat related question that is coming from the chat. You know, that video talked about there being a school in the neighborhood. Was the unsanctioned site kind of part of paving the way with those constituents that were like, oh, there's just, you know, everyone's always like, there's a school on this block, we can't possibly do anything. Were a lot of those concerns addressed before this formally opened, or did that all kind of come up fresh?
Yeah, so there's 2 answers to that. One, because the window to open these 2 sites was so finite, and we collectively were concerned that if we didn't jump, we'd miss it. Not much community engagement was done before the launch of the 2 sanctioned sites, and that is something that we're dealing with now and making reparation the best we can. Again, we made that decision knowing that we had been running unsanctioned programs in both locations for a while, and that over the years, I had been very strategic about who knew about the unsanctioned program and when. And that was really all about tiptoeing both neighborhoods up to the door of a sanctioned program. So the police precincts in both our neighborhoods knew and had seen them. The elected officials in both our neighborhoods knew and had seen them. The schools, I mean, it's New York City. You can't, there's school, they're everywhere, right? Like, it's a well-run program, integrates into the tapestry of the neighborhood and meets the needs of the people using the service and meets the needs of the neighborhood where it's located. And so some of that public engagement and some of that message shifting has been happening for years. I think many of you know this, but when de Blasio issued the article in 2018 in the New York Times announcing he would support the overdose prevention site pilot in 4 locations, he named the 4 service providers. We, of course, were one. He didn't tell us he was issuing the article. We were completely blindsided. Our landlords were blindsided. All of the programs were threatened with eviction, but we were evicted. And we used that really painful, horrible period of homelessness to our advantage. So we were evicted in 2018 in Washington Heights. We had a very big unsanctioned program up there, an 8,000 square foot drop-in center. We went from containing the issue to it spilling out all over Washington Heights in a very obvious way. You know, tripping over somebody who'd passed away on the street and somebody thought they were sleeping. They, you know, like really horrific stuff. We had a 4-year-old girl pick up a used syringe and stick it through her cheek. Had to deal with that at a community board meeting. It was bad. So we had they were either going to chase us out of the neighborhood, or we had to seize the moment and do a reframe with every single Washington Heights resident. And the thesis statement of the reframe was, you think you want us out of the neighborhood? You actually need to double down and expand our program. You look around, this is the consequence of not having us. You think it was bad before? You wait. Obviously a little bit more nicely than that, but that was the general sentiment, right? Which is like, back us, back us, back us. We are serving a need here. Let us do our jobs well, support us to do our jobs well, expand our program. It took us 2.5 years because thanks to good old de Blasio, he advertised to every landlord in Washington Heights what our proposed use of a building would be. So we talked to 57 landlords before we found the very special person who rented to us in 2020. But we did that reframe. So by the time we opened in Washington Heights, they were like, thank God, thank God they've got a building. Thank God this program is open. And we partner very deliberately with the schools. I told you I was going to bring this back to the schools that are less than a block away from our Washington Heights location. We're 7 schools, including a kindergarten, primary school, high school. We partner with them. We go after grants with them. We build planters with them. We do cleanup there. We grow food together and serve it to the community, trying to diversify our portfolio to not just be that syringe exchange or those people that work with the drug users, a real valued cornerstone of the community. But again, asserting that, not kind of being like, oh, I've got $5 from the health department. I'm a tokenized harm reduction program on the corner of some desk, being like, no, you want solutions? You got to come to us. We know what we're doing. And then, you know, as I've said many times, like faking it if we're, you know, until they sort of believe what we're talking about.
Yeah, I feel like that answer was like a whole story. That was awesome. So one question about funding and then another question about locating a site. How are you all managing funding? Who is paying for the, the supervised consumption services versus all the other services you provide?
So we are hopeful that the city and state will jump in as a funder after year 1. I think just like everybody else on earth, people are scrutinizing our outcomes, making sure nothing goes badly. And we're going to make sure nothing goes badly. But we know that they're kind of looking and thinking and looking at their budgets. We're of course waiting for Mary Bassett and Hochul to, you know, have the conversations they have to have. But that's next year. For now, it's private and foundation funding, just like you've heard from Rhode Island and Philadelphia, which is an ongoing stress and concern for sure. Yeah, I mean, we've got some really great news to announce shortly, which I think will be encouraging to the rest of the folks who are teeing up to open. I don't think I can share it just now, but in the private foundation landscape, just in the safer consumption landscape, you just need one funder to fall, and then the rest will be like, okay, it's safe. And it's got to be a big funder. It's got to be that anchor funder who is willing to take the risk, and we think we've got them. And so that will be great, and that opens it up for the rest of us.
That's great news. We'll look forward to hearing more about that hopefully soon.
Yeah.
So one question for us in DC is that our overdose hotspots are fairly dispersed around the district. You know, there's not like one neighborhood where it would be very obvious to put one of these sites. How would you approach that? You know, do you think multiple sites is the answer, or like, is it better to put all of your eggs in kind of one basket?
So the next thing, I love this, mobile consumption is great. We have a mobile overdose prevention center built. We're just figuring out like how far we want our necks out and if we're going to attempt to launch that vehicle. But some other models that some other things that we're thinking about is the virtual supervised consumption network, witnessed consumption through phones and tablets, geolocated to allow for services. I think that's going to be really, really interesting in our rural settings, and is really cost effective to set up. So essentially, a hack on the EMS and 911 system, but for overdose run by us, like us as in the royal us. We did little pilots of it in New York, in the big parks and the encampments to see if it had legs, and it works. So it's essentially somebody's going to they call into the network. We're watching, we're looking for those early signs. We're geolocated. We know who's closest to them. They get a ping, they rip over if they need to intervene if possible. So I think a combination of mobile and some of these other innovations is going to be the way to go.
That's awesome. That's really exciting. So does anybody have any last, like, very pressing questions for Kaylin? If not, I'm going to close the presentation. So Kaylin, thank you so much. That was awesome. I feel like we learned a ton from all three of you. I want to turn it over to our director here at the Department of Behavioral Health, Dr. Barbara Bazron, who can give us some closing remarks. I think you have to unmute yourself.
Okay, thank you very much. And I would really like to thank the three sites, the three jurisdictions for sharing with us. I think that this has been extremely informative and really will give us food for thought here within the District of Columbia. And so I really appreciate your time and appreciate your willingness to share very candidly. Also, I just wanted to share with you that Dr. LaQuandra Nesbitt, who is our director of DC Health, is also here with me. And I did want to give her an opportunity also. So if you could unmute Dr. Nesbitt, I would appreciate it. And then I'll make final comments.
Hi, thank you so much, Dr. Bazron, for that. Yes, I'm here and I have a couple of members from my team who are here. I think one had to jump off as well. Thank you all for sharing and thanks so much for your candor. We had the opportunity, or I had the opportunity through a state and territorial health officers trip several years ago to visit Vancouver to look at safe consumption sites there. I think that this has been remarkably helpful to hear how since that trip, you all have been able to successfully move forward both policy as well as now implementation of sites here in the US since that trip. I've been monitoring the chat as well. And I know that our community partners here in DC have posed a lot of questions, and some of them I think we'll have to have some robust discussion around in terms of our unique situation, not having statehood, and how even with the commitments that your laws and regulations have had with not using state funding or local funding, we still may face some unique challenges or barriers, but there's a tremendous amount of optimism also to have, given that these sites are now operational and sanctioned in a way that really gives us the opportunity to be optimistic and know that there's some momentum afoot. So I'm just grateful to have had your time, the thoughtfulness that you all have put into your presentations with covering so many different aspects of what needs to be done. We look forward to further conversations and dialogue. So thanks so much. And thanks, Dr. Bazron, for the opportunity to give some feedback.
Yes, thank you. And I really want to thank all of you for the work that you've done in paving the way for other jurisdictions to move forward. I think that the lessons learned from your activities will really inform our process. And so once again, thank all of you for the work that you do every day in moving harm reduction forward for the field. And I look forward to hearing the evaluation results that are the outcomes of each of these efforts. And Philadelphia, I wish you luck in your pursuits. So thank you with that. And Julie, back to you.
Yep. Thank you so much, Dr. Bazron. Just some quick next steps for the harm reduction strategy group members on this call. You will be hearing from us soon that, what our next steps following this meeting are. It was a Live Long DC goal to actually pursue this conversation and continue to pursue the feasibility of opening an overdose prevention center in the district. So this kind of meeting is helping us fulfill that goal. And you will be hearing from us soon about, how we're going to update some reports and kind of keep all of this work moving and keep the momentum going. So I think that's all we have, Jonathan. If that's right, I think I'll give you all 10 minutes back. And thank you again so much to our presenters. I know your time and attention is probably in very high demand right now, because I'm sure we're not the only jurisdiction asking these questions. So we really, really appreciate you being here.
I'll just echo Julie, if you are not currently involved in working with this OSG, feel free to, Sarah's got her contact information in the chat, or go to the Emily Davis who coordinated this session today. You can send her an email and we'll get you on the distribution list for the monthly meetings for this group. So appreciate your time today, and be safe. Have a good weekend.
Thank you, everyone. Stay warm if you're in a blizzard state this weekend.
Julie, I just sent you a Google Hangout if you wanted to hop over
Okay,
there.
perfect. Yeah, let's drop this one and go there.